For those of you who are natural, your natty limit is somewhere between 40 to 50 pounds of lean muscle gain in an entire lifetime. Now, some of you may end up lower on that range. Some of you may end up nearer to the higher end of that range. It really just comes down to genetics. Anyone who gains more than 50 pounds of muscle, it is 99% chance that they are not natural. And anyone who hasn't gained 40 pounds of muscle still has more muscle to gain. In other words, everyone, as far as I can tell, is capable of building 40 pounds of muscle naturally. Around 20 to 25 pounds of that muscle gain comes in your first year of training, and another 10 to 15 pounds of muscle gain comes after your second year of training. So that means that for the rest of your life, after your first 2 years of training or so, you will be spending chasing another 5 to 10 pounds of muscle growth. That's just the unfortunate reality of being a natural human being. We're not meant to have a lot of muscle. Everyone can build 30 pounds of muscle regardless of how bad their training is, as long as they just train hard. You don't need to be science-based. You don't need to meticulously track your volume or your exercise selection if you want to just build 30 pounds of muscle. As I said, as long as you're giving your maximum effort and you're consistent, that's attainable for every single man out there. The thing is though, if you want an advanced physique, so let's say 190 to 200 pounds lean, then it's not only important that you train hard, but that you train smart. Those people that you think are on steroids that you see online, many of them are, but a lot of them aren't. They just look like that because they know how to train. And so in today's video, I'm gonna give you the training adjustments that I have used that got me to 200 pounds at 15% body fat, which is what I'm currently at now, which is also 190 pounds at 10% body fat. And before I begin, if you're looking for some training programs, I've linked my ebook in the description. It has plenty that you can choose from. And you're also gonna find in there a free bodybuilding course with more than 50 videos covering everything from training, nutrition, lifestyle that I've never released onto YouTube. Okay, before I begin, I'm gonna quickly define what an advanced lifter is. An advanced lifter has nothing to do with how many years one has trained or how much they know about training. I couldn't give two shits. An advanced lifter is someone who has built 30 pounds of muscle naturally. And I don't care how you did it. So that is who this video is for. For people who have reached that stage and who want to learn more about what it takes to reach the next level. And if you haven't reached that stage despite training for 5 years maybe, you're either not training hard enough or probably both, you're not consistent. And that has nothing to do with genetics. So don't give me that cope. The first point I want to make for people who are at this stage is that you should not expect progressive overload every workout. In other words, you shouldn't expect to increase the amount of reps you do or increase the weight you do every time you go to the gym. I'm 7 years into training and I'm lucky if I go up in weight once a month. Normally, it takes me 2, even 3 months to progressively overload in that sense, to increase the amount of reps I do or increase the weight I use for the same amount of reps. If you just try to chase progressive overload every session, ultimately you're going to end up sacrificing your form, just chasing a new PR, which one, obviously does nothing for muscle growth, because if you're not using good form, you're not stimulating the muscles correctly for growth. But two, you may just run into an injury, which is gonna set you back months, if not years of progress. So there's no point in trying to force weight onto the bar. You have to let it happen naturally. Strength adaptations are going to come even when you're an advanced lifter, but they happen much slower. But the good news is that when they do come, you can be certain, unlike when you're a beginner or intermediate, that this adaptation in strength, this increase in strength, means that you have added muscle. Because at this stage, don't really come from neurological adaptations like they do when you're a beginner or an intermediate. When you get stronger 5, 6, 7 years into training after having built 30, 40 pounds of muscle, it's because you have gotten bigger. So as long as you're lifting heavy weights and you're maintaining your strength and then you're progressively overloading once in a while, that's a W. That means you are slowly adding tissue at a really good rate for a lifter that advanced. It's really impossible to get stronger quicker than that. So don't beat yourself up or get mad that you aren't getting stronger every week even. It's not normal to, because you're not on roids. Besides progressive overload, there are a bunch of other adjustments to my training that I've made that have allowed me to build muscle in my 5th, 6th, and 7th year of lifting. All of these fall under the same umbrella or go towards the same 3 goals, which are minimizing muscle damage, minimizing central nervous system fatigue, and maximizing motor unit recruitment. So let me just quickly define what those things are and how they're relevant. The central nervous system organizes muscle fibers into groups that are called motor units. When a motor unit is activated or switched on when you lift, all those muscle fibers within that group are activated. And so the goal for advanced lifters, if they want to see more progress, is to recruit as many motor units as possible whenever they train, because this activates the maximum amount of muscle fibers that's possible, which maximizes the overall growth stimulus of that set. But what also happens unavoidably when you train is that you damage your muscles. That's why you get sore sometimes after training. That's your body producing inflammation to repair and regenerate those damaged muscles. And that is a cellular process known as muscle protein synthesis. Depending on the quality of your sleep and the quality of your food, you'll be left over with a certain amount of, let's say, resources for recovery. And an important point to make is that when you're an advanced lifter, you take on much more muscle damage than when you were a beginner or when you were an intermediate lifter. Because although your motor unit recruitment deficit has decreased, in other words, you can access those higher threshold motor units which grow the most, these are also the fibers that are most susceptible to muscle damage. And so if you're still training like you were when you were 1 year into training or 2 years into training, then you're going to invite a lot of unnecessary muscle damage, leaving very little to probably no resources for myofibrillar protein synthesis, which is the addition of contractile proteins, the addition of myofibrils, the addition of muscle. Think of it this way: myofibrillar protein synthesis competes with muscle protein synthesis for resources. If your training is bad, muscle protein synthesis wins. If your training is smart, myofibrillar protein synthesis wins. Another key thing to remember is that when you train, you again unavoidably accumulate central nervous system fatigue. If your training is extremely damaging, this not only steals resources that could have gone towards myofibrillar protein synthesis, but also has a spillover effect insofar as the subsequent session, you'll only be able to reach lower threshold motor units, which means you'll be weaker. And if you do this on a consistent basis, you don't manage fatigue with your training, this leads to plateaus always. In fact, it's probably the reason why you haven't gotten bigger or stronger in ages. The good news is that there are simple, easy adjustments you can make to your training that minimize muscle damage, minimize central nervous system fatigue at no cost to hypertrophy stimulus. And I'm going to go through all of those now. The simple answer to grow more as an advanced lifter is to do less. If you're currently doing 20 sets of chest per week, if you're currently doing 20 reps for every set, cut it down to 10 reps for every set and thank me later. If you're currently doing lengthened partials and drop sets, cut it out of your program and thank me later. And of course, if you know what you're doing, you can use high rep ranges, you can use advanced training techniques, and you can still grow as an advanced lifter. Please remember that this is all extremely nuanced, and so I have to speak in general terms. I have to speak in a way which applies to 90% of people for there to be any benefit. And so generally speaking, all of these things tend to cause more muscle damage without also causing more hypertrophy. And so 99% of the time, just by removing all these things and making these changes, you'll instantly see results. And this is actually borne out by the literature. There's one studies wherein a group did 27 sets of legs per week and they built muscle. They then cut it down to 9 sets of legs per week and they still built muscle. But given that higher volumes lead to more fatigue and more muscle damage, what do you think is a better long-term strategy? Or who do you think will avoid plateauing? The guy who does 9 sets of legs per week or the guy who does 27 sets of legs per week? Now you might say, well, Frankie, taking to its logical conclusion, that means 0 sets is optimal. That means negative sets are optimal. This is why nuance is very important, because of course you need a certain amount of volume to simulate growth and also a certain amount to maintain the muscle that you have. In fact, in the same study, it showed that participants maintained their muscle mass on 3 sets of legs per week. So that's how incredibly easy it is to maintain your muscle and how little it requires. And given that it requires that little to maintain your muscle mass, you can't require much more than that to grow. As far as I can tell, the sweet spot tends to be 10 to 12 hard sets per muscle group per week. And anything more than that just leads to plateaus. And so if you're doing 13 sets of biceps per week, do less than that and see how you get on. If you're doing 15 sets of triceps per week, do less than that and see how you get on. Spoiler, you will get bigger and stronger faster. The way I would put it very succinctly is, if you're running full body split 3 times a week, then 10 sets per session would be optimal. If you're running upper lower 4 times a week, then 8 sets per session would be optimal. If you're running push-pull legs 6 times a week, then 6 sets would be optimal. And of course, this assumes that you're training at an adequate intensity. And by no means are these fixed, set in stone. These are just good places to start. Now, what do I mean when I say adequate? This also requires a bit of nuance, so just bear with me. I mentioned that lower rep ranges are a better bang for your buck, in the sense that you bring on less muscle damage, and so you bring on less fatigue for the same exact growth stimulus as high rep ranges. Now, does this mean that you can't use a set of 20 or a set of 30 to build muscle as an advanced lifter? Of course not. It just requires you to be more careful and more meticulous with your programming so that you avoid plateaus. And so in my mind, what's the point of overcomplicating things or making things more complex when there's no need to? Now, if you enjoy doing higher reps, if you enjoy doing sets of 15 or 20, then I highly encourage you to stick with that rep range, because that means you're going to actually train hard and be motivated to push to failure. But if you're indifferent and you're just looking for anything that's going to get you that extra 1 or 2 pounds of muscle, then I would say the thing that helped me the most is making sure that all my work is within the 5 to 7 rep range. And let me just explain briefly why that is. A set of 5 to failure builds as much muscle as a set of 30 to failure. That is true. The reason that is because they both converge on the same mechanism, which is mechanical tension. Mechanical tension is the pulling force that muscle fibers experience whenever they are being contracted. Whenever you lift a weight, whenever you lower weight. That tension is what builds muscle. But that only takes place when there is an involuntary slowing of your reps or contractions. In other words, you have to take sets to or close to failure in order to create mechanical tension and therefore in order to grow. In a set of 5, every single rep is slow and hard and effortful because you're lifting a heavier weight. And so every set in a set of 5 to failure is an effective or stimulating rep, as Paul Carter would say, because there's a lot of mechanical tension going on. In a set of 30, the same thing happens. The final few reps are extremely hard and slow and effortful, and there's a lot of tension being created there as well. Both of these are equally as hypertrophic. The only difference is with a set of 30 to failure, as I said, you accumulate much more fatigue, which means you have more to recover from for the same exact stimulus, which means you have to pay more attention to your volume per session and your exercise selection. And so why do that? And as I said, this may sound too meticulous, but you have to be somewhat meticulous when you're an advanced lifter looking to max out your natural potential. You can't just wing it like you used to. But that's not the only difference, because with a set of 30 and a set of 20, in order to generate the same exact stimulus as a set of 5, you have to go all the way to failure. But with a set of 5 or 6 or 4, there's a lot of tension created with every rep, because as I said, you're lifting a heavier weight and each rep is very hard to lift up. So training to failure is not actually necessary, because you can get in a sufficient amount of effective reps to produce growth without going to failure. And in fact, if you do take every set to failure, even if you work in the lower rep range, this increases the fatigue. It means that you have to pay attention to your recovery more and all that kind of stuff. And I found that actually, if I just take every set to 1 rep in reserve, this allows me to recover better, allows me to get stronger faster, and prevents me from plateauing. So in my opinion, as long as you're an advanced lifter and you know how to train to failure, you can safely now use 1 rep in reserve to better manage recovery and to progressively overload faster, which means to get bigger faster. On a similar note, another thing you can do, which again makes everything easier about training, is take longer rest periods. I still see guys resting like 60 to 90 seconds, and I'm just like, that's not enough. Whenever we train, our muscles accumulate metabolites, which is fatigue. As a result, once we finish our set, we feel a burning sensation, we're out of breath, and it takes a while, more than 60 to 90 seconds if you're training hard, for that to go away. And yet the amount of people I see who don't take the time to catch their breath, who don't take the time for the burning sensation to go away, and just go right back into their set, if you're doing that, you're just killing your gains. Because when you jump into your set too quickly, that causes us to reach the maximum tolerable perception of effort at lower levels of motor unit recruitment. That's another reason why high reps, but mainly why short rest periods, are not allowing you to build more muscle. I take at least 3 minutes now, even for single arm or single leg work, to rest between sets. If it's a set of hack squats, I may even take 5 or 6 minutes, because if I don't, again, I won't be able to lift as much in the next set, which is preventing me from building more muscle. If I don't get stronger, not really gonna build more muscle, am I? So, long rest periods if you want an advanced physique. Another thing worth mentioning is the importance of contracted position exercises and slow eccentrics for advanced lifters. First, taking more than 2 seconds to lower the weight, or exaggerating the stretch, or taking 4 seconds to lower the weight, only causes more muscle damage without causing more hypertrophy. There's 2 tempos that I follow normally. One is for heavy presses or heavy squats, which is 2-0-2-1, 2 second concentric, 0 second squeeze, 2 second eccentric, 1 second pause at the bottom. I like to dead stop on my big lifts. That's just how I like to do it. But for my isolation work, I'll do 2 second concentric, 0 second pause at the top, 2 second eccentric, 0 second pause at the bottom. Now, why did I mention contracted position exercises? The reason I mention it is because they become more and more important to focus on if you're an advanced lifter. Because stretch position exercises are more damaging than contraction position exercises. That doesn't mean that they're better than exercises which stretch the muscle. In fact, exercises where you're training the muscle at long muscle lengths can actually be more hypertrophic than contracted position exercises, despite being more damaging. So that's where the trade-off is actually worth it. But not all of them are. If anything, you should probably do more contracted position exercises than stretched. to make sure that you're maximizing hypertrophy and minimizing damage and fatigue. And here's a list of stretch position, high damage exercises, which are equally as good, and in some cases may even be more hypertrophic, but come at a cost of more muscle damage. So use a balance of the two, maybe bias contracted position exercises a bit more. Relatedly, not only are some exercises more damaging because they train muscles in the stretch, but some muscles are more damaged by those stretch position exercises than others. These damage very easily from stretch position exercises, and that's why you get sore all the time when you do a big press, overhead extensions, incline curls. So I would say in order to maximize hypertrophy whilst minimizing damage, maybe only stick to one stretch position exercises when you're targeting one of these muscle groups in one session. So if it's my push day, I'll only do one set of an incline press. My other chest work can be a pec deck. Your lats, your delts, your hamstrings, and your adductors are a bit more resilient and can handle a bit more stretch position work, but still damage relatively easily. And so I would say that you should target these muscles with stretch position exercises, but don't do more than 2 in one workout. So if it's my leg day, I won't ever do more than 2 sets of stiff-legged deadlifts. And then your most resilient muscle groups, which are your quads, your traps, your calves, and your glutes, these can withstand a bit more stretch work. And so you can do 3 sets of stretch position work for each one of these muscle groups. So on my leg day, if I do 1 set of hack squats and 1 set of single leg press, so 2 sets in total, then I shouldn't do any more stretch work for my quads on that day. Remember, these are not set in stone magical numbers, okay? I'm just trying to paint a picture for you guys. There's also a balance to play between single arm and single leg work and dual arm and dual leg work. When you do a single arm machine preacher curl, for example, there's fewer muscles involved, which means there's less cardiovascular demand, which means you're able to access higher threshold motor units because there's less fatigue interference, which means that one single arm curl has a greater hypertrophic stimulus than a curl when you use both arms at once. And these are very, very useful for bringing up lagging body parts. So for example, my right tricep is much smaller than my left, so I always do single arm triceps. My left hamstring is much smaller than my right, so I always do single leg back extensions. But remember, if I do 1 set for each leg on the leg extension, that's the same as doing 2 sets on the leg extension using both legs at the same time in terms of damage and fatigue and volume, essentially. So I would say that you should definitely do single arm, single leg work for your lagging body parts, for your muscle imbalances. But if you have a stronger body part, there's really no need to do that. And so you want to play this game where you do a bit of single arm, single leg work to bring out lagging body parts, but not for everything. Otherwise, it's just not practical, because then you'll have to end your workouts pretty early. Another way to become advanced is not only to use exercise selection to your advantage, but also exercise order. Because cumulative fatigue interferes with your ability to recruit high threshold motor units every workout, your focus for that entire workout matters a lot, and the first set also matters a lot. So for example, if your chest and your shoulders are just really dominant and they're just clearly a genetic strong point, and your arms and your back, let's say, are pretty average, and you'll only know this if you're an advanced lifter. Here is an upper-lower split which you can follow to ensure that your arms and back get a bit more bias, a bit more stimulus, but you have enough volume to make sure that your chest and your delts stay the same size and don't atrophy, whilst also keeping total muscle damage and fatigue at a minimal. So this split is a 5-day upper-lower split, so upper-lower rest, upper-lower rest, upper-lower rest, repeat. And you should take 1 to 2 sets per exercise, 2 or close to failures. The first day of the week is an arms focused upper day. So for example, you can start with a close grip Smith press. This is going to give your triceps and chest stimulus. Then you can move on to a tricep push down, then a machine preacher curl. Then you can finish with a Kelso shrug or a chest supported T-bar row. And the next upper day is going to be a back focused upper day. So you can start with a wide grip lat pull down. Then you can move on to another chest supported upper back row, maybe a dual arm hammer strength row. Then you can do a lateral raise variation like a machine side raise. And then you can finish off with a pec deck. And then the third upper day, you can do what you like. You can maybe have a more balanced one. You can maybe bias back again or arms again. It's up to you. But as long as you have those 2 days, you're biasing your arms and your back whilst also maintaining chest and delt size. All right, Jesus, that's a long video, so I'll end it there. If you're still watching, respect. I hope you found this helpful. Please leave me any questions you have in the comments, and also any video suggestions, anything you guys want me to make a video on, let me know as well. And if you're interested in getting my help to improve your health, your physique, then also leave a link to my one-on-one coaching in the description. I'd love to help you out, so check that out if you're interested, and I'll see you in the next video.